The key was ice cold when it slipped into my hand at the exact moment my husband raised his glass to 40 years of happiness. The waitress leaned in close, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Mrs. Ema Lawson, if you sign today, his mistress will be sleeping in your bedroom tomorrow." In front of me was the stack of papers my husband called a memory test because I had supposedly been getting confused. Beside him, my daughter kept urging me on in a calm voice that sent chills down my spine. They had no idea I was holding the key that would throw the truth wide open and lock this chapter of lies shut for good. Forever. It turned out those 40 years of happiness had been a lie from the people I loved most. If you believe women always have the right to make their own choices, stay with me while I expose this truth. The curtain was starting to fall. I still do not know how I managed to keep a smile on my face. Maybe it was just the reflex of someone who had spent too long being decent. My other hand rested on the file, pretending to read it carefully. Under the wooden trellis, the string lights cast a warm glow so comforting it felt cruel. Right beside it sat the anniversary cake, its frosting carefully piped with red letters. 40 years of love. Love. Looking at those words made my throat tighten. Richard was still standing there, glass of cider in hand, calm in a way that felt terrifying. He had always been good at playing the steady one. The sincere, low voice, the gentle guiding hand, the devoted, sorrowful look in his eyes. To everyone around us, he was the tired husband worried about his wife. Beth was the devoted daughter, and I was just the woman beginning to lose her mind, hesitating over something necessary. No one saw the cold key lying in my palm. "Ema," Richard said gently, like he was soothing a child. "No one is forcing you. We just want to make sure you're taken care of the best way possible. Mom, just sign it. It's only a cognitive evaluation. The longer you drag this out, the more awkward it gets." Awkward. I looked at my daughter, the child who used to sit in my lap with a fever, who used to run barefoot through the apple orchard and call me the best mother in the world. And now, in front of the neighbors, she looked at me like I was a burden. "So this is the anniversary gift you got for me?" A few uneasy laughs broke out. The air went flat. Beth lost patience and shoved the file toward me, her chestnut-painted nails tapping on the page. "Mom, don't make this bigger than it is. This isn't a joke." Richard's hand landed on my shoulder. That touch had once been my anchor for most of my life, but that night it only made my skin turn cold. "Not now," he murmured, as if he were protecting me from my own confusion. Then he turned to the guests and gave a thin smile. "Sorry, everyone. Ema gets more emotional than usual these days." Near the cake table, I heard a woman whisper, "Poor thing." I could not tell if she felt sorry for me or for Richard. I bent down as if to straighten my napkin and quickly looked at what I was hiding in my hand. It was an old plastic key card, the corner worn down, the letters faded but still readable. Maple Crest Inn, Room 7. My heart started pounding, but my face had to stay calm. Some shocks are too big to make you scream. They just push every sound around you farther away, as if you are standing underwater, watching the world through thick glass. Just then, the waitress passed beneath the last string of lights. She did not look back. She simply carried her tray of empty glasses, her brown hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. She moved so calmly no one would have guessed she had just thrown a grenade into the middle of my life. "I need to go inside and get my medicine." Beth started to stop me, but Richard moved faster. "I'll go with you." "I'm only going to the kitchen for a minute, Richard." For the first time in 40 years, I called him by his full name instead of the familiar endearment I had always used. Just one small detail, but it was enough to make his eyes pause for a split second. Beth noticed it too. She pressed her lips together, then quickly forced a laugh to cover it. "Don't be long, Mom. Everyone's waiting to cut the cake." I stood up. My knees felt weak, but not because of age, the way they always told other people. It was because the truth had finally cracked open. This whole marriage might have been built on layers of lies, and I had been the last one to know. Inside the house, it was dark and quiet. The voices outside turned dull through the glass door. I went straight to the kitchen and braced both hands against the cold stone counter to stay upright. Beth's pale blue teapot was still sitting there from earlier that evening. The faint, bitter taste at the bottom of my cup over the past few weeks came rushing back into my memory. So did the way my mind had felt foggy every evening, and those moments when I walked into a room and forgot why I was there. Richard had always frowned with concern, and Beth had always been the first to hold my arm. That was when I finally understood. Not every hand reaching out is trying to save you. Some hands only steady you so you can get used to becoming weak. I closed my eyes for 1 second. No. I could not fall apart yet. The kitchen door opened onto the side porch. I took a breath of cold air to clear my head and saw the waitress standing at the end of the stone path beside the decorative apple crates. Under the slant of the porch light, I could see her face more clearly now, no longer just a stranger passing by. She looked a few years younger than Beth, with pale gray eyes and a jawline so firm it hurt to look at. Some features make you afraid to stare too long, because if you do, you have to admit things you do not want to admit. You don't have much time. What exactly am I supposed to believe about you? She glanced over my shoulder toward the backyard, where Richard had just burst into laughter in the middle of some casual conversation. You should believe me because I've seen him rent that room for the past 8 months. And take a good look at that Vanessa woman. She's not some assistant. She's the one who's going to move in here the second you walk out the door. It felt like the blood in my body was draining away little by little. Is your name Ava? She nodded once. My mother kept this secret her whole life because he wanted her to. I won't. Those words were too heavy for my heart to take in all at once. Before I could say anything else, Ava pushed a folded note into my hand along with the key card. Room 7. There's something in the safe under the closet shelf you need to see before he wipes it out. Why are you helping me? Her eyes changed. Not softer. Darker, as though they had brushed against a rotten memory. Because he promised my mother a life and then threw her to the curb like she had never existed. And because I'm not kind enough to stand there and watch him do it again. From the backyard, Beth called for me, her voice sweet as honey. Ava stepped back and pulled the brim of her uniform cap lower. Do not sign anything tonight. Let them think you still don't understand. She turned and walked away, the empty tray in her hand making her disappear as if she had never been there. I stayed frozen on the side porch, the note and key card pressed hard into my palm. Out there, my daughter was laughing. My husband was telling stories about love. For the first time in 40 years, I understood that some homes collapse in silence, even while the lights are still on and the guests have not gone home yet. When I returned to the backyard with a face so calm it surprised even me, Beth looked at me immediately. Her eyes searched my face, waiting for the smallest crack so she could slip right through it. Richard pulled out my chair. Are you okay? My eyes fell on the hand resting on the back of the chair. That hand had repaired our porch roof, held our first child, and held my hand at my mother's funeral. The truth had turned every memory into evidence in a grand deception. I'm a little tired. Beth pushed the file back in front of me. Then you should sign it now, Mom. Instead of answering, I picked up the pen and flipped through the first 2 pages. The legal wording covering every inch of the paper was chilling in how carefully it had been prepared. The doctor's name, the cognitive evaluation form, the guardianship recommendation. They were not worried about me. They were clearing a path to push me down. I don't want to sign anything tonight. It's our anniversary. The table went still. Richard gave a strained little laugh to rescue the mood. All right, we're not forcing you. Dad! Beth started to protest, but the light touch of Richard's hand on her wrist made her stop. Then he used that weary, gentle voice again. We'll talk tomorrow. Today is supposed to be a happy day. A happy day. The candles on the cake burned lower and lower, the glossy white frosting reflecting light onto those false faces. I smiled, thanked people, cut the cake, and let them take pictures. Richard slipped an arm around me in front of everyone, still the perfect man after 40 spotless years. It was not until the sweetness of the frosting touched my tongue that I realized I no longer felt hungry. Night settled slowly. The guests left behind the sound of dishes clinking and car doors shutting sharply in the driveway. Like any woman who does not know how to sit still, I kept cleaning the messy kitchen, even with my heart in pieces. Beth followed me inside, still wearing her dark blue dress as if the performance was not over yet. "I don't understand why you have to make everything harder," she said, setting a stack of plates on the counter harder than necessary. "It's just a test." I kept rinsing the cake knife, the steel blade shining cold under the water. "How long have you been planning this, Beth?" "You're overthinking it." "Since when did you start telling people I get confused?" "When it started becoming a problem." "Or when you needed it to become a problem?" Beth's face hardened. The good daughter mask fell away, leaving only the naked irritation of someone whose work was almost done and suddenly delayed. "Just sign it. This house isn't right for you anymore. This house is my home. And you're not strong enough to live here by yourself." "Who told you I was going to live here by myself?" Beth blinked. A moment of hesitation, just enough to show I had hit the right spot. She turned away and grabbed a dish towel as if she could hide from the truth behind it. "You're always like this, Mom. Everything has to become a battle. Dad is just trying to protect you." A bitter laugh almost escaped me, but in the end it stayed trapped in a heavy breath. Protect. That was the word they had both been using for months. Richard used it with the neighbors. Beth used it with people from church. A clean, polished word wrapped around cruelty, making me look like the only ungrateful person in the room. I could not sleep that night. Richard came to bed later than usual, smelling like pine and cider. He lay down beside me as if nothing had happened. In the dark, I stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly, and my memories started rearranging themselves into a new order. The sleepiness that came too quickly after my evening tea. The moments when I stopped in the middle of speaking because my mind felt covered in fog. Beth appearing right on time with her little tray, the cup of chamomile tea, the 2 pills already set out in the bottle cap. Richard's worried frown in front of guests. "Are you okay? Ema's been forgetting things a lot lately. Maybe we should get her checked soon." Then another memory came rushing back, sharp and cold. About 2 weeks earlier, I had woken up in the middle of the night, thirsty. As I passed through the kitchen, a thin strip of light from under the cabinet caught my eye. Beth was standing there with her back to me, pouring something from a small bottle into the tea tin. When the floorboard creaked, she snapped the lid shut and turned around with a fake smile. I was just looking for some honey. That night, too tired to doubt her, too ashamed of the thought that flashed through my mind, I had simply nodded and walked on. Now, lying in the silence, the shame was gone. All that was left was the cold. Near dawn, Richard turned in his sleep and draped an arm over my waist out of habit. I gently lifted it away. Not because I was afraid he would wake up, but because my skin could no longer bear the closeness of a man who had become a stranger in my heart. Richard was cruel. He used the daughter he had denied all those years as staff at his party, while quietly clearing the way for his mistress Vanessa to take over this house. He thought Ava would stay quiet for money. He was wrong. The sky was still dark when I got out of bed. The house was so quiet that even the kettle starting up sounded like a warning. I ignored the old tea tin and made a mug of strong black coffee. The bitterness cleared my mind in a way that hurt. Outside the window, the morning mist hung low over the apple orchard. Everything looked exactly the same as it did every other morning. Only I was no longer the same. I got dressed, picked up my bag, and walked through the dining room. The file Beth had left behind was still sitting there, the corners of the pages straight and sharp like a reminder of their ambition. I opened the drawer, took out the motel keycard Ava had given me, and pushed it deep into the bottom of my purse. Just as my hand touched the doorknob, Richard's voice sounded behind me, thick with sleep. "Where are you going this early?" He stood at the end of the hall in his gray robe, his silver hair slightly mussed. The look of an ordinary older husband, exactly the kind of image most likely to soften someone's heart if they did not know what lay underneath it. "I'm going out for a little while. I'll come with you." "No. Ema, after last night, I don't think you should be alone for too long." "Then you'd better start getting used to that feeling, Richard." The door opened and cold air hit my face like a bucket of water. The tires crunched softly on the gravel as I backed out of the driveway. I did not look up at Beth's bedroom window. I did not even bother checking the rearview mirror. My hand stayed tight on the steering wheel as the road out of town opened in front of me. Maple Crest Inn sat on the north edge of town. I had driven past it countless times and never once imagined I would someday pull in there to gather the stolen pieces of my own life. In the gray light of early morning, the town had that special kind of quiet that makes old secrets start to look like truth. Eva did not hand me the envelope right away. She held it in her hands, studying me, deciding whether the woman in front of her was strong enough to survive another stab to the heart. Finally, she set it on the bed beside the gray folder. You need to know exactly what's happening to your body. Not guess, not suspect. No. Inside the envelope were a few folded pages, an old business card, and a handwritten note. Harold Bishop, retired pharmacist. I couldn't take this to the pharmacy in town, Eva said. Richard and Beth know too many people, but Mr. Bishop used to work with my mother. He keeps quiet, and more importantly, he doesn't owe Richard anything. I looked down at the small tea tin and the pill bottle with only a few tablets left in my purse. Everything was turning upside down. The hidden daughter, the mistress, my own daughter's betrayal. But in the middle of all that shock, the thing that tightened my throat most was that little tea tin, the most ordinary object in my kitchen, something I had picked up every night with the simple trust that my daughter cared for me. Let's go. The road to Mr. Bishop's place ran past a line of low houses, an old fire station, then opened onto fields of yellowing grass at the end of the season. Eva drove. In the passenger seat, my hands gripped my purse while I stared out the window with an empty mind. White wooden fences slid past. An old woman walked her dog across the road. The American flag on the porch of the hardware store stirred lightly in the wind. The small town kept moving the way it always did. People watering plants, buying newspapers, greeting each other on the street, with no idea that a life was quietly being torn apart behind closed doors. Did you drink the tea last night? No. That's lucky. How long have you known? Not for sure. Not for long. But I started getting suspicious when I heard Beth tell Vanessa in the parking lot that you were softening faster than expected. At first, I thought it was just mean gossip. Then I saw Richard quietly hand a thick envelope to a neurologist in Burlington. A few days later, you showed up at the church party looking hollowed out, like you hadn't slept in 2 nights. The memory of that evening came rushing back. I had forgotten the name of an old acquaintance and frozen in the middle of saying hello. Richard had put a hand on my elbow then, giving everyone a sad little smile on my behalf. The shame and self-blame that had haunted me all week suddenly turned into an icy current running straight down my spine. What if I really am getting old? What if they're just taking advantage of something that had already started happening? Everyone gets old, Ema, but getting old doesn't mean letting other people rewrite the truth for you. My eyes drifted back to the window. Her words did not lessen the pain, but they pointed straight at the truth. Betrayal always tries to wear the mask of something reasonable. Age, exhaustion, forgetfulness, excuses anyone would believe without question, especially when they come from the mouths of the people you love most. Mr. Bishop's old pharmacy was tucked between a laundromat and a bakery. The wooden sign was weathered, the glass door spotless, and inside it was quieter than the big modern drugstore chains. There was only the smell of paper, the scent of old wood, and the steady calm of a place that treated filling prescriptions as a responsibility instead of a transaction. The bell above the door rang and Mr. Bishop stepped out from behind the counter. He was tall and lean, with neatly trimmed white hair and half-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose. After Eva gave a brief introduction, he looked at me for a long moment, then invited us into a small room in back. There was a metal table, an old filing cabinet, and a sink polished to a shine. You don't need to tell me everything. Just show me what you brought. The tea tin, the pill bottle, and the 2 remaining tablets were set on the table. Mr. Bishop pulled on gloves, opened the lids, inhaled, then tipped a little of the tea leaves onto a paper tray. The silence in the room turned thick. The rustle of paper, the snap of a plastic cap, the tapping of his pen against the edge of the table. Tiny sounds, suddenly as clear as the ticking of fate. He asked what medication I had been taking, how often, who prepared it, and what symptoms I had been having lately. My answers came slowly as I tried to piece every detail together. The sudden sleepiness, the mental fog in the evenings, the times I walked into a room and forgot why I was there. The more I spoke, the quieter Mr. Bishop's face became. At last he took off his glasses, set them on the table, and looked me straight in the eye. Mrs. Lawson, I can't write an official report without full testing. But there is one thing I am sure of. This is not ordinary chamomile tea. My fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. It contains a mild sedative, he went on. The kind that doesn't knock someone out right away, but over time will slow the body down, dull reflexes, and especially cause a serious decline in short-term memory for a period of time. Enough to make it look like I'm losing my mind? He nodded slowly and firmly. Enough for an outsider to believe you're cognitively declining, especially if that idea has already been planted in their mind. Eva looked at me, but I just stared at the tea tin on the table. That lifeless object had suddenly become the embodiment of betrayal. Every warm cup of tea my daughter had brought upstairs had been a dose aimed straight at her mother's clarity. And the pills? Mr. Bishop poured the 2 tablets into his palm. On the outside, they look like the prescribed medication, but the color is slightly off. They may have been swapped out for a different batch. If someone wanted to paint the picture of an older woman slowly slipping into confusion, he paused, choosing his words carefully. This would be a very effective way to do it. Effective. The word was clean in a ruthless way. Not impulsive, not accidental, but a patient calculation meant to turn a clear-minded woman into a shadow of herself. In my mind, the shattered pieces started fitting together. Richard telling friends I was tired. Beth devotedly bringing tea to my room. The looks they exchanged when I forgot some small detail. The guardianship file ready on the table. It had all been tailored with care, so I would be forced to wear a twisted version of old age. If they keep going, I asked, what's the next step? Mr. Bishop answered without hesitation. They'll gather more evidence to petition for temporary guardianship. Once the court believes you can no longer manage your finances or medical care, they'll have the right to decide where you have to live. Memory care, Eva said quietly, naming the horror that had already started taking shape in my mind. Mr. Bishop said nothing, but his silence was more than enough to confirm everything. When I bent down to pick up my purse from the floor, my hand was steadier than I expected. Maybe by then the pain had already become something else, the icy clarity of someone who had finally seen the net tightening around her. Mr. Bishop slid a note toward me and said, I'll keep the samples and follow the proper process if you want to go further. But from now on, do not drink anything they prepare for you. And don't let them know you found out. Eva picked up the tea tin and screwed the lid on tight. As we stepped back out, the little bell chimed softly behind us. The noon light had brightened, the street was getting busier, and the bakery next door had just set a fresh tray of pies in the display case. The town kept moving in its calm, orderly way. Only the ground beneath my feet had just changed. Back in the car, Eva did not start the engine right away. She opened the center console and pulled out an envelope thicker than I expected. This is the financial part. Once you know what they're planning to do to your body, you also need to know what they're planning to do with the rest of your life. I stared at the envelope in her hand for a long moment without opening it. The phrase "the rest of your life" kept drilling into my mind. This had gone far beyond an ordinary betrayal in a marriage. Richard didn't just want to throw away his old vows. He wanted to step onto my land, into my house, over my name, and strip away my final right to decide for myself, as though all of it had been his from the beginning. How many people know about this? Eva shook her head. Fewer than you think, but enough to make the plan look legal. Inside the envelope were printed emails, account statements, and a draft agreement with a law office in Burlington. I had lived with Richard for 40 years. Even though I wasn't a finance person, I could still recognize money slipping into the shadows, transfers into strange investment funds, payments made to Vanessa under the label of consulting. The most painful thing of all was Beth's handwriting in the margin. Once the guardianship is done, transfer signing authority to Dad. I let the papers fall onto my lap and took a long, slow breath. Does Beth need money that badly? Beth needs more than money, Eva said. She needs to be on the side of the winner, and Richard knows that. We sat in silence in the car for several minutes. Sunlight fell across the windshield in a thin strip. In that stillness, one name kept pounding in my mind like an old door slammed by the wind. Caleb. For years, I had taught myself not to touch that name whenever I was feeling weak. Not because I had forgotten, but because I remembered too clearly the empty room upstairs, Richard's clenched jaw, and Beth's sneering remarks about her troubled brother. I had even believed the version of my son they had spun for me. I pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen reflected a face so unfamiliar I had to blink to recognize it as my own. Ava turned to me. "Who are you calling?" The person I should have called a long time ago. Caleb's number was still there in my contacts, never deleted. It rang 3 times, 4, then on the 5th. He answered. "Mom?" That one word alone was enough to tighten my throat. His voice was deeper and heavier than before, but it still held the hesitation of the little boy who used to stand outside the kitchen door and ask if I needed help, before his father barked at him to go back to his room. "Caleb, where are you?" A short silence passed. "Knoxville." "What's going on, Mom?" Looking through the windshield, I saw Ava staring straight ahead, quietly giving me a little privacy. Not knowing where to begin, I said the truest thing I could. "I need you to come home." This time, the silence lasted longer. I could hear a truck engine idling on Caleb's end, then a door slamming hard, as if he had stepped somewhere more private to hear me. "Are you okay?" "No, but I will be if you're here." After I hung up, Ava did not ask anything else. She started the car and drove me back toward town. Before I got out, she gave me one last warning. "Don't go home looking like someone who knows everything." After 40 years in this marriage, you learn that women can hide a lot behind their faces. That was never the part I doubted. Driving home alone, the familiar road still whispered under the shade of maple trees, just as it had every fall before. The only difference was that now I was seeing everything through the eyes of someone who had just woken from a forced sleep. The White House came into view around the bend, calm and beautiful in a way that hurt. Maybe that was the weapon of betrayers, using peace to hide the hand quietly closing around the throat of someone in their own family. Neither Richard nor Beth was home. In the kitchen, the old tea tin was gone. I stood there staring at the empty spot for a while, then slowly took an unopened box of peppermint tea and made myself a cup. Even with no one else in the house, I still carefully poured out the first steeping. My body had learned suspicion faster than my mind. The afternoon moved slowly. Caleb's bedroom door stood open, revealing a space still almost untouched, quiet in the way abandoned places are quiet. The old bookshelf, the map of the United States pinned to the wall, the little chipped spot on the corner of the desk. Everything was still there. Standing in the middle of that room, I felt something heavy invade my mind. Not ordinary sadness, but the late shame of a mother finally understanding what she had missed. Caleb arrived at dusk. The sound of an engine stopping in front of the house marked a return with no warning, no celebration. When I stepped out onto the porch, I saw him getting out of a pickup truck covered in road dust, taller, leaner, close-cropped hair, shoulders shaped by someone who had learned how to keep himself afloat in the world. He stood still at the bottom of the steps, looking at me as if he wasn't fully sure he was seeing the right person. "Mom," I nodded. "Come inside." The first stroke of luck. Richard wasn't home yet. Caleb followed me into the kitchen. While I poured coffee, he sat down in the old chair by the window, his hands clasped together. The calluses across his knuckles spoke of winters he had lived through without this house to shelter him. "What's going on, Mom?" Without a word, I slid the file and Vanessa's email across to him. I watched in silence. The moment I saw his jaw tighten and his eyes darken as he skimmed the first lines, I knew he understood everything. He set the papers back down very slowly. "So they finally did it. You knew what they were planning?" He leaned back in the chair and gave a faint, lifeless smile. "I didn't know the details, but I knew Dad was never going to stop at cheating. Tell me more." A long silence passed, as if he were dragging something heavy out of a memory buried too deep. When he spoke, his voice had dropped lower. "When I was 27, I saw Dad in Burlington with another woman. Not Vanessa, someone before her. I thought telling you would be enough. I thought the truth would carry its own weight. Beth knew before I did. She told me to keep quiet. Said you wouldn't be able to handle it. She said if I blew it up, this family would explode and everything would fall on you." "And then?" "And then I told him anyway. I told Dad first, hoping he'd get scared and stop. But he moved faster. He told you I was stressed out, imagining things, unable to control my anger. And Beth stood right there and backed up every word. I sat perfectly still, my body trying to learn how to survive a new rhythm of pain. Caleb looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed. I tried a few more times, but Dad just made everything worse. He told the family I was unstable, told the pastor I needed help, told you I was self-destructing. Then I left. Not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid that if I stayed, sooner or later even I would start believing he was right. I reached across the table and took my son's hand. It was rough and warm, nothing like the softness of the little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder. He flinched for just a second when I touched him, as though he had lost that feeling a very long time ago. I blamed the wrong person. Caleb shook his head. You believed your husband? Most people would. No, I should have believed my son first. As a parent, there are mistakes you will never fully fix for the rest of your life. But I understood then that the moment you stop running from them and dare to face them, love can still find its way back, stripped bare, but truer than before. Outside the window, the evening light tilted over the apple orchard in a dark gold wash, still and heartbreaking. Caleb was sitting there. Ava was out there somewhere with more evidence. For the first time in months, I felt like I was no longer alone in this house. After Caleb wolfed down a sandwich and finished a second cup of coffee, the kitchen stopped being a place for waiting. It became a war room where the truth was pieced together from cold things. Receipts, emails, photographs, and recordings. Caleb opened the old laptop he had brought with him. Ava arrived a little after 8 p.m., the brim of her cap pulled low, carrying a brown file bag. She sat down without needing to be asked. The three of us were quiet for the first few minutes, not because there was nothing to say, but because when betrayal becomes too visible, words suddenly start to feel unnecessary. Ava pulled out a flash drive. Hallway camera footage from the hotel in Burlington. I had someone download it before the system recorded over it. Caleb plugged it in. The screen showed the third-floor hallway. The angle was high and slightly off-center, with no sound. Richard stepped out of the elevator in a gray coat, a key in his hand. A minute later, Vanessa appeared carrying a cream-colored bag, glanced around and walked straight toward him. By the third frame, the way Richard placed his hand on the small of her back, too natural, too familiar, was proof of a habit repeated far too many times. I did not take my eyes off the screen. What I felt then was not exactly pain. The pain had already been nailed in place the moment I saw the necklace in the safe. What I felt now was shock at how ordinary betrayal looked. It was not loud. It walked down a hotel hallway with the calm composure of a man who still came home on time and asked his wife if she needed an extra blanket. Caleb shut off the video and opened the email folder. Vanessa was writing more than any mistress should. It was not just longing. These were calculations about timing, neighbors, and lawyers. One email said, Beth thinks the neighbors are starting to notice she's slipping. If Richard keeps gathering evidence, the hearing should go smoothly. Another was colder. Once she's taken away, I'll start moving a few things in. The blue room can wait. The blue room. It used to be my mother's sewing room. I had just changed the curtains in there last spring. And yet Vanessa talked about it as if she were choosing where to set her suitcase in a rental. Ava placed another old phone on the table. This is from Willowgate. Beth didn't know I was sitting right behind her. The faint clink of glasses and the hiss of the espresso machine blurred in the background. Then Beth's voice came through so clearly I had to grip the edge of my chair. Just wait. Once Mom finishes the tea, she softens right up. Everything she says gets half a beat slower. Vanessa gave a small laugh. That sounds cruel. What's cruel is letting her keep pretending she still has control over everything, Beth replied without the slightest hesitation. I turned my face away, not because I could not bear it, but because I was afraid I would remember Beth at 10 years old, hugging the mug of hot cocoa I had made her, sitting with her legs tucked up and telling me stories about school. Some pain does not come from the words being said now. It comes from realizing that the cruel voice you are hearing once used to call you Mom. Caleb turned off the recording, his jaw clenched tight. I used to think Beth got worse because of Dad. Now I don't even know when she started becoming just like him. No one answered. Ava opened the last audio file. This is the one we need to protect. Richard's voice came through. I'm not getting divorced. Vanessa said something too faint to make out. Richard let out an irritated breath. If Ema loses legal capacity, Everything still stays with me. The house, the accounts, the decision-making power. I'm not stupid enough to drag half my life into court and have my books ripped open. I closed my eyes. Some sentences are strong enough to kill off a part of your soul. Not because they surprise you, but because every last layer of kindness has finally peeled away. No more fake concern. No more righteous sighs at the dinner table. Just numbers. "Mom," Caleb said softly, "I'm okay." The feeling of shattering from those first days was gone. In its place was a clarity so cold it was almost frightening. Richard had chosen this road carefully. Beth had followed him on her own 2 feet. I could not sit around waiting for someone to come save me anymore. "We can take all of this to the police," Caleb broke the silence. "The emails and these recordings are more than enough." Ava nodded. "Enough to open a case. But Richard will deny everything, drag it out, and say she's paranoid because she's being manipulated. He's best at turning the person telling the truth into the one who looks suspicious." I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window. Behind me was the old clock from my mother's time. In front of me was a pile of evidence enough to strip Richard's fake decency bare. But I wanted more than that. Not some loud revenge. I wanted the truth to step into the light in the very place Richard had spent his whole life building his image. I wanted the people who worshipped his faith and family values to see what was really underneath the mask. I wanted Beth to hear her own voice played back in front of the same people she still smiled at every Sunday. They did not just need to be investigated. They needed to be judged. "I will call the police, but only after they expose themselves." Caleb frowned. "What are you going to do?" I looked at both children. One I had given birth to. One Richard had denied. Both of them had grown too exhausted from all this silence. "I want people to see the truth with their own eyes, not through a file sitting on some desk. If it were you, would you quietly walk away? Or would you force the truth into the light? Let me know what you would choose in the comments. And don't go anywhere, because what comes next is the moment every mask starts to fall." Ava did not ask another question. She leaned forward, studying me. "Then we have to let Richard believe he's won." She was right. Men like Richard do not fear being accused. They fear losing control. And to keep control, they have to believe the other person is still in the palm of their hand. The next morning, I went downstairs early, made coffee, and set out an extra cup on the counter like I always used to. Richard's footsteps came down the hallway. He stopped at the doorway, studying whether his wife was worn out or keeping her distance. "Did you sleep at all last night?" I turned back toward him, letting my shoulders sag just a little, letting my voice drop. "Not much." Richard stepped closer. "I know this is heavy, but I only want what's best for you." I wrapped my hand around the coffee cup without drinking. "Maybe you're right. I thought a lot last night. Maybe I overreacted." Richard pulled out a chair and sat down, careful, as if he did not want to startle some frightened animal. "Ema, no one blames you. You have to let him think you've broken." Ava's voice echoed in my mind. "I don't want to fight anymore. If everyone thinks I need a memory evaluation, I'll do it." This time, Richard truly relaxed. He sat up straighter and let out a quiet breath of relief, the satisfied look of a man who had finally pushed open the last door. "I knew you'd understand. But before I go, I want one peaceful evening with the neighbors. A small gathering to say goodbye before I go into care. A farewell party? I've lived here 40 years. I want to leave with some dignity. Of course, if that would give you peace. I'll tell Beth to handle it. No, I want to prepare it myself, just this once." Richard did not object. He was in the most careless stage of a winner's arrogance, generosity. He believed I had stopped resisting, Beth would stop snapping, and Vanessa was just waiting for the day she could walk in. That very arrogance would bury them. At noon, Beth heard Richard explain the plan, and she could not hide the triumph on her face. "Seriously, Mom agreed?" I casually dried the plate in my hand. "I'm tired, Beth." She leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, all arrogance. "You should have been tired a long time ago. A week earlier, that sentence would have left me choking back tears. But now I only lifted my head and looked straight into my daughter's eyes until she had to glance away. Beth was not sorry. She just was not used to seeing the mother she used to control so easily go quiet in such a strange, new way. That afternoon, I called the old neighbors. Ellen from church, the Mercers, Tom the mechanic. I used the calmest voice I had to invite them over for a goodbye before I go somewhere with full-time care. No complaining, no spilling my heart out, just enough to make them believe this was the resigned acceptance of a woman slowly losing her mind. That night, Caleb slipped in through the back door. I told him everything while pretending to organize the dish cabinet. He agreed that fast? Caleb frowned. Too fast, because he thinks I've given up. Caleb opened his toolbox and pulled out cables and a signal splitter. Quietly, he checked the lights, the outdoor speaker system, and the old projector screen we used to use for family pictures. It was bitterly ironic. The very place that had once held our warmest memories was about to become a courtroom for the people who had turned family into a performance. Ava did not come to the house. She met us at attorney Helen Whitmore's office. The woman was in her 70s, with neatly cropped silver hair, and she listened slowly to every recording, making notes in the margins with a fountain pen. "The police don't step into adultery," Helen said. "But switching medication, falsifying guardianship records, and intentionally damaging someone's mental clarity, that's different. I've already contacted Deputy Sheriff Morrow. He'll be at the party in the name of keeping the peace." Ava sat at the corner of the table, her hands clasped together. "Richard is very good at turning the truth into a family misunderstanding. Then we will not give him the chance to tell his version of the story," Helen replied. The plan came together in the smell of old paper and polished wood. Caleb would handle the technical side. Ava would keep the originals. Attorney Helen would make sure the legal steps were in place. The police would not rush in right away. They would stay at the edges and wait for the curtain to tear on its own. The night before the party, Richard stood in front of the mirror adjusting his cuff. In that falsely caring tone, he asked, "Do you want to invite anyone else?" I took off my earrings and looked at my own calm face in the mirror. "No, that's enough." He nodded with the satisfaction of a man about to finish the job, then turned off the light and went to bed early. I lay there in the dark, listening to the even breathing of the man beside me. The wind moved through the apple orchard, sounding exactly like it had on every other ordinary night in this house. The only difference was, I was no longer waiting for morning to be taken away. I was waiting for the trap Richard himself had agreed to set. That evening arrived with a cruel kind of calm. Yellow lights were strung across the backyard. Long tables were covered in cream tablecloths, wooden chairs arranged in a semicircle facing the projector screen. More guests came than I expected. Ellen wore her church sweater. Tom brought a bottle of homemade cider. The Mercers looked at me with the soft pity people reserve for someone helpless. Over the past few months, Richard had planted that pity in them with his sighs and those dramatic little gestures of support whenever he took my elbow. Beth moved around the table, pouring water, adjusting napkins, wearing the face of a devoted daughter. Vanessa arrived late, discreet in a cream-colored dress and pearl earrings. She did not stand close to Richard, but the thin bracelet on her wrist was the same one I had seen on the inn receipt. Richard waited until everyone was seated before stepping into the center of the yard. He lightly tapped a spoon against his wine glass, the thin sound cutting through the whole space. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice warm and rich. The same voice that had fooled this whole town for years. This house holds so many memories for my family. That's why tonight means so much. My family. I heard every word clearly. It felt like someone had touched an old wound, only this time not to hurt it, but to end it. Richard turned toward me, offering his hand at just the right moment, wearing exactly the right amount of tenderness in his eyes. The past few months haven't been easy for Ema, or for any of us. But sometimes love means accepting painful truths. The most important thing is that my wife is safe and cared for. Ellen touched her hand lightly to her chest. A few people nodded with sympathy. Beth stood across from him, dabbing at the corner of her eye with a tissue. Such a perfect gesture it made people ache for her. Richard placed the file on the table, the pen laid neatly on the last page. "We don't want to make Ema uncomfortable. She only wants this to happen gently, with all of your love around her." Beth looked at me, her eyes wet. "Mom, just sign so everything can be settled. No one is forcing you." I stood up. My knees were not shaking the way I thought they would. Once you can see the shape of the storm, the fear falls away and leaves behind a strange calm. I picked up the pen, turned the first page, then looked up. Before I sign, I want everyone to see exactly who I'm handing this house over to." The air froze. Richard gave a strained smile. "Ema, you don't need to do this." "I think I do." Beth took half a step forward. "Mom, don't—" I looked straight at the screen. Caleb stood by the controls and quietly pressed the button. The projector flared to life. The first image: Richard stepping out of a hotel elevator in the gray coat I had picked out for him last fall. Vanessa appeared carrying her cream-colored bag and walked straight toward him. The footage showed Richard placing a hand on the small of her back and pulling her close with easy familiarity. Whispers started rising. Richard spun toward the screen, his jaw tightening hard. "What is this?" "We're not done," I said. The video shifted. They were sitting side by side at the bar, and the way Vanessa rested her hand on Richard's arm wiped away every last trace of doubt. Beth lunged toward Caleb. "Turn it off!" "Sit down," Caleb barked. Then the next audio came through the speakers. Beth's light voice floated over the yard. "Once Mom finishes the tea, she softens right up. After that, everything she says gets half a beat slower." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the crowd. My chest clenched. Even after preparing myself, hearing my daughter discuss poisoning me in broad daylight was still a mortal blow. Vanessa jumped to her feet. "That's edited." "Sit down," Deputy Sheriff Morrow said as he stepped into the light. Another officer stood beside him. Their presence alone was enough for everyone to understand that this gathering had changed into something else. Richard started losing control. "What the hell are you doing here?" Morrow did not look at him. "Mrs. Lawson, go on." The screen changed again, this time to photos of the emails. The words were enlarged across the screen. "Once she's in a nursing home, I'll start moving my things in little by little. Beth says the closet in the master bedroom is bigger than it looks." They had been talking about my bedroom the way people talk about a new place they are about to move into, while I was still standing right here in front of them. Beth hissed, her angelic face gone. "Mom, you've lost your mind. You're destroying everything because you refuse to accept reality." I looked at her. "Which reality? That you drugged my tea? Or that you've been measuring my closet with your father's mistress?" She went speechless. Richard stepped forward, trying to place himself between me and the crowd. "Ema is not well. That's exactly why I wanted her evaluated. Her son and an outsider have been manipulating her." Ava stepped out of the darkness, pulling down her cap before lifting her face into the porch light. "I'm not an outsider, Richard." The whole yard went silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Richard's face shifted from dignified to horrified. Ava spoke each word clearly. "I'm the daughter you left behind before you married her. I came here to say you are doing exactly what you did to my mother, only this time cleaner and crueler." I set the pen back down on the table. The soft click of metal against wood was tiny, but to me it sounded like the door to my old life slamming shut. Richard stepped back, looking around at the neighbors who were already edging away from him. "None of this proves anything," he said, his voice lower now. "I was only trying to protect my wife." "Protect me from what?" My voice came out cold and sharp. "From owning my own house?" Deputy Sheriff Morrow stepped forward. Attorney Helen Whitmore appeared behind him with her leather briefcase already open. "It's not just the video, Mr. Lawson. We have independent test results, audio recordings, and falsified guardianship documents meant to steal Mrs. Ema's assets." Those dry legal words were thrown into the middle of the backyard, the same place where we had once eaten apple pie and celebrated wedding anniversaries. I stood there, hearing my name protected by the law instead of hidden behind pity. Beth went pale and tried to find a supportive look from the crowd. "This is crazy. My mother is being agitated. She's unstable. And her—" She pointed at Ava. "Who is she that you people believe her?" Ava shot back without blinking. "Someone who knows exactly how good your father is at erasing women from his life." Vanessa panicked, clutching her purse as she stepped backward. "Richard, you said this wouldn't—" "Shut up," Richard shouted. The last layer of his calm facade finally cracked. The whole yard went silent. Ellen gripped the back of her chair. Tom's face turned red with shame for his old friend. The Mercers looked at me, their first sympathetic expressions now turning into shock as they realized the true nature of this so-called model family. Morrow flipped open the file. Mr. Bishop confirmed that the tea and medication samples were tampered with. Mr. Lawson, Ms. Beth, you'll need to come with us. Go where? Because my mother took the wrong pills by mistake? I looked straight at my daughter. You still dare to call that a mistake? There was not a trace of regret in Beth's eyes now, only fury that the prey had escaped the trap. You don't understand, she said through clenched teeth. You made everything harder than it needed to be. So that's why you had to put drugs in my tea? My question left her speechless. Silence fell over the backyard, heavier and more terrifying than any shouting could have been. Richard tried to step in front of his daughter, but Morrow stopped him. Stand still, Mr. Lawson. She's my wife. And she's also the owner of the assets you intended to steal, Attorney Helen added, landing another fatal blow. Richard's face changed color. His pride collapsed the moment he realized he had completely lost control of the story. Vanessa took advantage of the chaos and fled toward the side gate. Her heels clicked sharply against the stone. No one stopped her. Richard turned to look after his mistress with a hopeless expression. That image, the model husband standing in the wreckage of his reputation, watching his mistress run away, was humiliation at its deepest. Beth clung to him like a drowning person grabbing a post. Dad, say something. Richard turned toward her. The polite father was gone. All that was left was a failed man desperately looking for someone else to blame. This is all because you kept pushing everything too fast. That confession put an end to everything. So now you're blaming it all on me? I'm blaming the person standing here with me. I did everything for you. The second the words came out, Beth knew she had slipped. But it was too late. Deputy Sheriff Morrow nodded to his colleague. Both of them stepped forward together, not loudly, just with the cold formality of the law laying hands on the people who had just lost the right to tell the story their own way. Mr. Lawson, Ms. Beth Lawson, you'll need to come with us. Beth stepped back, stammering. No, this is a misunderstanding. Morrow did not argue. You can explain it at the station. Richard looked at me one last time. There was no remorse in his eyes, only resentment. He looked at me as if I were the one who had betrayed some unspoken agreement, that I was supposed to stay quiet long enough for him to leave with the house, his reputation, and his mistress all intact. Beth started crying, bitter, angry tears. When the female officer touched her arm, she jerked away. Do you really want to see this happen, Mom? Memories of Beth at 6, asleep on the sofa, at 14, pouting in anger, or at 25, laughing in the kitchen flashed through my mind like an old strip of cloth dragged across skin. Painful, but belonging to another era now. No, I said, I don't. But you're the one who chose this. As father and daughter were led out through the gate, not a single guest stepped forward. That was the real collapse. The crowd spread itself apart, leaving a cold, empty space around the two people who had once lived off the town's respect. People stayed silent, stepped aside, or lowered their eyes. No one opened their mouth to save them anymore. I stood quietly beside the round table. The file was still open, the pen lying across it, waiting for a signature that would never come. The night wind carried the smell of damp grass and melted candle wax, the familiar scent of so many family evenings, but from now on the decent-looking shell of this house had officially been torn away. The first few weeks passed in a strange rhythm. The house was so quiet I could hear the furnace kick on. No more sound of Richard's shoes in the hallway. No more Beth's voice making plans in the kitchen. There were only Caleb's footsteps, slow and steady, as if he were practicing what it felt like to truly come home. I did not attend the first hearing. Attorney Helen said the file was already too clear. Richard was charged with elder abuse and conspiracy to steal assets. Beth was not spared either. The law does not distinguish between mother and child. It only looks at what was actually done. When I heard that Beth's real estate license had been permanently revoked, I felt no satisfaction. There was only a deep, hollow space opening inside me, the place where a mother's most stubborn hopes had once lived. Some losses do not come from death. They come from the moment you realize someone you love has personally cut off their own way back. Caleb stayed. At first, it was only for a few days to help clean up after the party, then a few weeks to fix the leaking roof on the cider shed, and then gradually it became normal for him to be there at every dinner. He still did not talk much, keeping the habits of a man used to walking alone. doing more than he said, drinking black coffee, always leaving his dirt-streaked boots outside the back door. That silence no longer felt unfamiliar. Some mornings I would walk into the kitchen and see my son's broad, quiet back out on the porch, and my heart would ache with one late thought. I should have called him home sooner. "Are you sure you want to keep the shed?" Caleb asked while we stood together on the concrete floor that still smelled like fresh wood. Looking at the old apple crates stacked neatly in place, with the November light slanting gold across the floor, I nodded. Yes, there are still a lot of things in this house worth keeping. The corner of Caleb's mouth moved slightly. That was the answer he had been hoping for all along but had never dared ask for. Ava did not stay in town. She was not the kind of person who walks into a story and neatly becomes part of a family. There was no easy emotion between us, nothing simple enough to name. Too many of Richard's lies, and too many lost years standing between two women. The afternoon before she left, Ava stopped by the apple orchard. She stood outside the wooden fence in a brown coat, her hair tied low among the rustling dry leaves. "I didn't come to ask for anything," she said first. "I know." Ava looked at the house for a long time. "My mother believed that one day he would choose her. Now I understand Richard never chose anyone but himself." I stepped closer and looked into her pale gray eyes, carrying all that tiredness. "You saved me. I just stopped being quiet." Ava gave a slight shake of her head. We did not hug, and there were no words asking her to stay. Two women simply stood there in the wind, seeing each other more clearly after stepping out from the shadow of the same man. Winter arrived slowly. The house no longer felt suffocating. The boxes of tea Richard used to buy were thrown out, the curtains were replaced, and the reading chair was moved closer to the window. Small changes, but enough to make each corner stop looking like a place where I had once been pushed out by silent footsteps. This morning I woke up early. The room was dim with the blue tint of dawn. The bed felt wide, but no longer cold the way it had in the final years of that marriage. When I opened the window, the air rushed in carrying the smell of dried apples and cold earth. The first light of day spilled through the glass, falling across the rug, the chair, and the wardrobe Vanessa had once planned to take over. I stood there, listening to the house stir awake. This victory had no cheering, and it did not wash away all the pain. It was only a quiet morning, standing in a room that had almost been stolen from me and understanding this. Richard wanted to erase me from this place. He wanted to turn me into a name spoken with pity and then forgotten. But in the end, he was the one who disappeared. I think a lot of people will understand this feeling. Sometimes the cruelest part is not being hurt. It is realizing how long you kept making excuses for the person hurting you. We spend so much time trying to find reasons for them that we forget to find ourselves again. Life can be deliberately overwritten by someone else, but we always have the right to keep the final page for ourselves. Ema's story ends here. Where are you listening to this journey from? Have you ever had to fight to stay standing in your own home? Share how you feel, and don't forget to hit like, follow, and subscribe so we can meet again in the next stories.